The challenge is you want to advocate for your customers. You want other people to know what the pain is and pleasure that your customers are getting. You want them to know both, but you have to take a measured approach. Nothing is ever perfect, right? And you shouldn't have to feel like everything should be perfect. And your customers certainly don't expect that. They're going to tell you what they want and what's working and what's not working. But they know there's certain things you can do something about and certain things you can't.
Hi there, folks, and thank you for tuning in to Lifetime Value. My name is Dylan Young, and I'm the host of this podcast, and I cannot thank you enough for giving our brand new podcast your time and attention. My goal with this podcast is to contribute something different and refreshing to the community in the form of a weekly podcast that keeps folks up to date on the goings-on in our little corner of the professional world. Now, that being said, this episode was recorded in late 2022, and so it is not in our typical format. Still, I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. Peace. Mr. Ed Powers, welcome to the Lifetime Value Podcast. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Great to be with you, Dylan.
So you are the principal consultant at Service Excellence Partners. Do I have that right?
Yes, sir, you do.
Can you tell me a little bit about what it is that Service Excellence Partners is and what the principal consultant does?
Sure. Well, I'm a consultant. I do work with customer success and customer experience, focused on B2B. So I've been doing consulting on and off in my career for probably 20 years. And then also in operating positions, VP of customer success 2-3 times now. And but doing consulting with clients that go from startups to multi-billion-dollar global enterprises.
Very cool. And so you called out this operational background I noticed you had as well. And I wanted to ask you about the through line of that operational background to what you do today. You said specifically customer success, customer experience. Do you see there being a very clear through line there?
Yeah, I actually started my career in sales. When I came out of college, I worked for HP for about 12 years. And my first 6 there was in sales, and then I went into marketing and then finally into quality and operations. So I've been working with customers from the very beginning, and all the operational roles I've had on the delivery side, I've been working with customers as well, from customer support to customer service delivery to professional services to customer success. So kind of the whole life cycle.
Okay, so recovering salesperson, check. And so you've landed on customer success and customer experience. Why? Why is that? Do you think that that's where you've kind of staked your claim?
Well, one of the reasons, I love selling back in the day, and I still have good friends that have been selling their whole career. But, after about 5-6 years, I was like, boy, this
Mm-hmm.
feels kind of transactional. I'm not sure that's my gig. That's not my jam. I really like, I'm interested in how things work. I'm interested in building relationships. And one of the things I missed was, when you're a salesperson, you got quota, right? You got to make your numbers. And that's always the pressure, and that's how you're paid, and that's what you do. And you don't always have the opportunity to see, well, what happens next, right? I've seen the first act. I want to see all 3 acts here. And I always really enjoyed watching how things progress and playing a role in that.
I think that's the best answer you could give. That's probably why we're all here, right? Because they are the sales and customer success are kissing cousins, and either you like the hunting or you like the relationship and sort of the ongoing gathering, maybe farming aspect of customer success.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think personally, I'm much more wired that way, more of a farmer and a cultivator than a hunter.
I also want to call out, I think it's important to give you your kudos. You are a top 25 customer success influencer as published by Success Coaching. So congratulations for that.
Thank you.
What did you have to do to get on that list?
Well, I think you got to be nominated for it, and then they have people can vote for the folks, so that I think that's weighted as well. And then they have a judging committee. They look at criteria and they narrow the list. And there's a lot of very talented folks. I think just to get nominated is quite an honor. So but they go through a very deliberative process, and I think they're looking for people who have made a contribution that give good advice, and that there's something there, you know.
I think that's good for anybody who's trying to get on one of those lists. First of all, make friends in high places is the first note that I took from that.
Never hurts.
Never hurts. So you have a pretty unique perspective on customer success, as far as I understand it. It's a rather scientific point of view that you take. I'd like to hear a little bit more about your overall process, and maybe how it is you came to that strategy or that philosophy.
Yeah, and I think it comes from working with customers for so long. You know, at the end of the day, it's all about decisions. I'm just fascinated by how people do that. How do their brains do that? What do they, what's the process? What are the factors? How do people decide, and why do people decide what they decide, right? Everything we do in customer success leads up to that. People are going to decide, are we going to renew our agreement? Are we going to cancel? Are we going to buy less or buy more? And everything that's beneficial to the company you represent comes after that, right? All the revenue, the retention, the lifetime value, the valuation of the company all follows it. So it's all about decisions. And for me, I've always been fascinated. I'm an engineer by training, so I've always been into math and physics. And if you think about the brain, it's quite a computer. It's an amazing computer. It's the most capable computer and most advanced computer known to any of us, right? You can take the most sophisticated quantum computer and it does not even compare to what a human brain will do. A 2-year-old will go circles around the most sophisticated computer. And it's just such a fascinating, amazing, thing about the human condition is how our brains work.
I think it's an interesting quote that you cite in some of your training videos. It's you're going to have to mention who it is that you stole this quote from, but it goes, "We're not thinking machines that feel, we're feeling machines that think sometimes."
Yeah, and that comes from a great scientist by the name of Antonio Damasio, and he's well known for something called somatic marker hypothesis, which means that whether we're conscious of it or not, our feelings, our emotional system is marking our memories, right? We're always, the things that we remember, the brain actually captures that emotional state and assigns it to a particular memory. And the stronger that is, the more we recall it, even if it's below our conscious awareness. So that's the point he makes. Behavioral scientists have known this for a long time, is that we think we're so logical and rational that we make always well thought out decisions. But in truth, we are emotional beings. And 70 to 80% of the time, we use our intuition and our emotions to decide, and then we use our logical system to justify the decisions that we've already made.
So I want to take a step back to the method and your background and the way you think about decision making. Can you give an example, maybe in your consulting life, where there was a customer, and you can spare the names of those involved, but explain maybe an example where they just weren't understanding the science behind the decision making, or maybe the emotion behind the decision making?
Yeah, and I do a lot of customer journey mapping and design kind of work,
Okay.
and it's when you get into that, part of my approach is to really lean heavily and to educate as to what's going on, the things that you can't see. What are those things that are happening inside their brains? And as we go through that process, it's pretty easy to identify particular little moments that happen that are really impactful and cause people to feel a certain way. And typically you can identify them, or the client will. They'll say, there's something going on here, and let's unpack that. And when they see a real concrete example, then it starts to really sink in as, oh yeah, there is something to that. And what is the emotion that we're trying to trigger here? Because at the end of the day, it's less about what customers think about you. It's really how they feel about you. They really lead with their feelings. Are they comfortable? Am I comfortable working with Dylan? Do I trust Dylan? Does Dylan, has he helped me to be successful, right? And we tend to operate at a very high level of gist, meaning that we summarize a lot of stuff. There's a lot of details that we don't really keep track of. We just kind of come to a gist about something, and we get an impression, and we have a belief about what happens over time. And ultimately, that sways everything, right? So if once we go through that journey and we kind of identify what these points are, and if you can frame that in something that they already know, clients get it. I mean, that's, but most people don't stop to think about it.
So I am not embarrassed to say that I worship at the altar of customer success. But when I describe it to folks, part of most of what I love about it is how data oriented it is, right?
Mhm.
So again, another scientific approach to the process. But when I explain it to folks, I do typically say it is still somewhat art. And most would say that that's the relationship piece. That's more difficult to train. You can train how to analyze data, how to define the difference between lagging indicators, leading indicators, what it is you're trying to accomplish, and what the behaviors are that can help you get there, aka make your customer successful. And so it's a little bit hard for me to wrap my head around it, and that's not to say that it's not true. It sounds like you think, or you train, that you can almost plan for the emotions you want your customer to feel in the journey mapping process, in that customer journey design. Help me understand that, because that's hard for me. I think my superpower is getting folks to trust me. You're about to ruin my world and tell me that anybody can do it if you put it into a journey map.
Well, and not anybody can do it. I think that there are, let's just take trust, for example. So psychologists and neuroscientists say trust is really composed of three fundamental elements. It's ability, benevolence, and integrity. And in virtually all the research, they point to those three factors. So what are they? Well, ability, do you know what you're talking about? Are you consistent in your behavior?
Right.
That's what we mean by ability. Benevolence means we are committed to shared goals. That we are working together. You're not selfish. You're not working for yourself, right? And integrity. Integrity is doing the right thing, even if it's the hard thing, right? To really own that truth and to communicate. All of those are behaviors. All of those are evidence as you work with someone. You exhibit those behaviors. And what do you do? How do you influence it? Well, you do have to know your stuff, right? You
Right.
got to be well studied. You got to be paying close attention. Think about your doctor. Do you trust your doctor? Well, if my doctor knows what they're talking about, they genuinely care about me, and they speak the truth, even if it's going to be the hard truth, then I probably trust my doctor. Well, how do we see that behavior in ourselves? How do we do that? And if we're consistent individually on doing that, over time, customers will start to trust.
I love that. Do you think it's fair for me to start introducing myself as the customer doctor if I am confident in my in my customer success abilities?
That's it. And think about that. That's actually a very good analogy, right? The customer presents with pain, with a problem, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
your
true.
job
It's true.
is to diagnose what's going on. You don't just, doctors don't just write a prescription. They unpack that. Well, it could be this, could be that. They ask more questions. They run some tests, and then they say, yeah, I think this is what the problem is, and here's how we're going to solve it. I mean, that's a great example of what a CSM should do.
When it comes to setting expectations with customers, you also have a great saying that I maybe you came up with. What starts right stays right. So first of all, is that your quote? And
No, I wish it was. I wish it was. I had a boss that said that all the time. He had little wise little sayings like that. Rich Keith, my old boss and business partner for a number of years, he had a
okay,
hundred of those. Yeah.
all right. Shout out, Rich. Elaborate on what that means in customer success, please.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the way Rich would think about it was generally speaking, it's an observation, but the science actually backs it up, and that's how our own brains work. Is that when we're in a novel situation, our brains, but even below our conscious awareness, will set an expectation about what's going to happen next, and we're not even aware of it, but that's in order for us to learn anything, the brain always is looking for patterns, is looking for if this happens, then what is that outcome, right? And in order to say, was that a good or bad outcome, it has to have an expectation about that outcome, right? So what happens in these novel situations is the brain will set some kind of a reference point with not a whole lot of confidence, knowing that, hey, I'm going to learn something as we go. But where that set point occurs and what happens in the early stages sets you on a path, right? And you're either going to be on the happy path or the unhappy path. And in the very beginning, where that expectation is set and what happens in the early stages has disproportionate weight on where that customer, where that person winds up. So when we think about what starts right stays right, it's all about that. And we all know this intuitively. You got to set expectations, you got to manage expectations. There's a ton of science that shows if you're going to have any impact, that is the place to do it. Because after a while, people they get that evidence and they start building up a belief. And a belief is just an expectation that's paired with a level of confidence. And they've shown that the brain does both. The brain actually has two signals that it integrates. And when it sees in a repeated outcome against an expectation and that confidence is high, then it becomes a belief. And beliefs stick around forever. It creates something called confirmation bias. And we've all heard of that before, is
Right.
that once we get to that point, whatever new information that comes in, we either, if it supports what we already believe, we notice it. If it contradicts what we believe, we ignore it, right? So there's a process to get there, and it is profoundly impacted by what happens in the early stages. So what starts right stays right, and that's how our own brains work.
How often do you go through that spiel with a vice president of customer success and they stop you halfway through and they say, I need to get my sales counterpart in here because they don't know how to set expectations? Now, that's half joke, but it's also a curious question because that's one of the most natural tensions you see with customer success and their sales partners is a misalignment of expectations during that sales process.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And having lived on both sides of that, having had a quota monkey on my back,
Mm-hmm.
and pressure of what are we going to do this month, Ed, you know, um, I totally get it. And when you're trying to close a deal, you don't want anything to disrupt that. You don't want to bring someone in that's gonna screw up your deal, right? I mean, that's gonna pay your mortgage that month, right? So you're heavily incentivized. Yeah, I might look the other way. Let's not get too specific here. They have a general impression, and you can't blame them because what are they? That's their reality, right?
Oh, you can. You can. You can. Let's
There we
not
go.
get too specific. I would have steam coming out of my ears if somebody said that to me.
Yeah, and but on the other side of it, there is this issue. There is this process of that our customers' brains are going to go through. And if it's way off the market, we got trouble, right? And I think the way that you get to that with salespeople is they have to see that as not a risk to my deal. They have to see that as a way to win my deal, right? And if you bring in a lot of the clients I work with, we spend a lot of time really doing some change management, some education with the sales team so that they can see this is going to help me win and this is going to help me close my deals faster if I bring in this customer success manager when the deal's at the right point. They got way down the funnel here and it's got to make sense. But when you bring in that CSM, he or she or they can help you close this deal because you're bringing someone in and say, "Hey, I want to introduce you to somebody. This is going to be your new best friend." And they're going to help you be successful. And this is how I'm going to differentiate everybody I'm selling against, right? Because I brought this person in. We got a plan for you. We're going to get you to success. And that should help us close a deal faster and increase my odds. But you got to be careful how you do this, right? And when you do that introduction, you got to do it in such a way that you don't screw up the deal, but the customer walks away with much better clarity and much better confidence. This is the right answer, and those expectations are appropriate. And if you do it right, it's magic, right? Everybody wins. But you got to get over this inherent fear that salespeople have man, I got this going. It's in a good place. Don't screw it up.
Yep, I got a good thing going here.
Yeah,
Don't let that guy in the room.
that's right.
I want to turn a little bit to maybe zoom out. We've used a couple of terms here: customer success, of course, and the inevitable customer experience. Do you differentiate the two?
Yeah, I see them as two distinctly different. And if you imagine kind of a two by two matrix, right? You've got good or bad, on both of those. You can have an outcome. We're always going to have outcomes and we're always going to have experiences, right? I mean,
Right.
we always perceive both of those. And if we think about it, we can have a good outcome with a good experience and we're pretty happy, right? That's happy path. Good outcome, good experience, like that. We can have a bad outcome and a bad experience. We're not very happy about that. But we can also have a good outcome with a bad experience. We can have a bad outcome with a good experience. And we're not really happy about that either, right? So we're kind of picky as humans. And in terms of how our own brains work, again, our brains don't make a distinction. They really don't. Both of those factors roll into how the brain computes value. And the neurosciences have shown that whenever we make a decision, preference is a factor that we weight. Well, where does preference come from? History, experience, right? So just thinking about going to a restaurant, right? Why do you go to a restaurant? Well, because you're hungry. What does success look like? What's an outcome look like? Well, I'm no longer hungry. I'm satiated, right? So I could go anywhere. I have a lot of different choices. Now what weighs next? Well, what do I like? I like Chinese food or I like Italian food or whatever. My preference weighs into that. So when I make the next decision, I combine both. Was I successful, right? And what was the experience? The brain does not distinguish those two. They are one and the same in how it computes value. So a lot of times when people, draw lines between the two, that's not how the brains of our customers work.
So you've just scientifically explained why my wife only ever orders one specific dish from each restaurant we go to. I ran across this. It's actually an acronym in a couple of trainings that you shared with me, and it is one I've never heard before, and I had a little bit of trouble wrapping my head around it. So you're going to need to help me with this one. And also, I'm well aware that this is like a personal training session that I'm getting for free here. So if at any point you need to drop the paywall on me, that's absolutely fine. But Whizziati, spelled Wysiati, Whizziati. I feel like I'm in the spelling bee. Can you tell me a little bit about Whizziati and how does it impact our daily lives as customer success folks?
Yeah, and this I took from a Nobel Prize winning behavioral economist by the name of Daniel Kahneman. So you're starting to see a pattern here. I just steal stuff. I don't make
I see. I didn't want to say it, but it is becoming apparent.
Yeah, I have no original thoughts here. But yeah, Whizziati stands for what you see is all there is. And what Kahneman says, this is something also called availability bias. And Kahneman has been studying how people make decisions for many, many years. And one of the things that he talks about, he has a wonderful book called Thinking Fast and Slow. So it's Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a tremendous book. And he spends a lot of time in that talking about availability bias and what you see is all there is. And what he's saying is that whatever is easy to recall defines our reality. So in other words, if we don't have, we think that we understand the customer's experience. We think that we know what the salesperson's experience is. We make a lot of assumptions about that. But because it's not in something that our brains already know and can easily recall, we can't imagine what that is, not very well. We think we can, but we really can't. So what you see is all there is really about defining reality by only our own experience and only what we can easily recall. And that is a blind spot. That is a bias that we all have.
Right. We don't want to do that.
We do not want to do that. Yeah. Got it. We want to assume, and this is hard because when you have the blinders on, you don't know you have the blinders on, right? But we have to almost take a step back and say, I may not have all the answers. My assumptions may not be right. I want to go observe. I want to ask a lot of questions. Tell me about that. What has been your experience? What are you up against? And to really listen for that and to try to put yourself in their shoes. And when you do that, you can start to see things from their reality, right? And in customer success, we have to, I think what Wiziati tells us is we have to understand that we have those blinders on all the time, and we have to step outside of those and into someone else's reality and ask a lot of questions. Can you show me? Can you tell me? What is it that you're dealing with? What are you struggling with? What is important? Why is it important? Before we know how to help them, right? Assume that you don't know. That's much more accurate than assuming you do.
I have, and this could be a lingering result of some of my personal anxieties, but I've learned professionally, if you ever think that you are 100% confident on the answer and you have never heard somebody else say that answer, aka it's an assumption, ooh, you better run for the hills. That is the number one way to stick your foot in your mouth, to have egg on your face, whatever analogy you want to use. I have learned through making many mistakes, which I think is how most people do it who don't read, books by Daniel Kahneman, to always double check your work, so to speak.
Exactly. And we all suffer this. Everybody we work with suffers this. People in the development team and product, they think they know what customers' realities are, and they assume they know. And that's why people struggle with customer centricity because of this blinder that we all have, is what you see is all there is. And we need to step outside ourselves and assume we don't, because that is really what's going on.
Can you talk more about that? We struggle with customer centricity because of Wiziati. What does that
Mhm.
mean?
Well, we don't. We are so familiar with what we know. We are so familiar with our own reality that we assume everybody has our reality, and they don't, right? And part of that is just that expectation of I see the world through my own lens, through my own experience, my own belief structure, and recognizing that that is what I do, but my reality is different from Dylan's reality. It's different from other people's reality because your beliefs and expectations and experience is different than mine, right? So we tend to look at this without really deeply understanding that that bias even exists, right? So part of this is just to stop and slow down and say, maybe I don't have that answer. I know what I'm doing. I know what's happening in my little bubble, and I have some rough ideas about what people are doing in their little bubbles. But before I make any decisions, I need to set that aside. And I want to really walk in your shoes a little bit. Tell me what that is. Show me what that is. Walk me through that. What's really going on here? Help me understand that.
Is it so? I've got this word coming into my head. I've got a habit of distilling things down into one word, one phrase, one sentence that doesn't do the idea justice. And I'm afraid I'm doing that here. But I'm going to step out onto the ledge anyway. Is it fair to say that this is a form of empathy, of empathizing? Is that wrong? Is it too simple?
No, I think empathy is part of it. I think empathy is and people will discriminate empathy from sympathy or compassion.
Mhm.
Compassion is feeling something and doing something about it. Empathy is kind of feeling what someone else feels. In order for you to have empathy or to experience it, you need to step into their world a little bit and listen to them and tell me what your pain is and why are you feeling that and what happened. And when you tell me your story, I start to relate to that. I relate to it from my experience, right? So when we stop and ask and we're curious and we want to know that, that triggers empathy, right? And we have to be open to that. And I think people in customer success are wired that way. There is a difference. And when people genuinely care and they're in that line of work because they want to service people, they want to help people to get from where they are to where they want to be, you have to ask those questions and be oriented that way. So it's that open mindedness, having those conversations, and feeling what they feel.
Do you think that's a double-edged sword, the natural empathy that customer success professionals have within them? Do you find that folks struggle with advocating for both sides of the relationship, for the customer as well as for the company for which they work, the vendor, so to speak, even though I don't like using that word. Do you find that some folks struggle with that if they are highly empathetic?
No, that's a really good question, and I think it's one to really contemplate, because I think you're right. I mean, people can get lost in where their customer is. That's that empathy as opposed to compassion. Being compassionate means I get it, I understand it, I can feel what you feel, and here's what I can do. And I think that's the twist, is to really understand when you get to that, well, here's what I can do. I can't take someone's pain away. I can do some things that may take some of that pain away. And the difficulty is understanding what you can and can't do and being okay with that. And I think the challenge is you want to advocate for your customers. You want other people to know what the pain is and pleasure that your
Sure.
customers are getting. You want them to know both, but you have to take a measured approach. Nothing is ever perfect, right? And you shouldn't have to feel like everything should be perfect. And your customers certainly don't expect that. They're going to tell you what they want and what's working and what's not working, but they know there's certain things you can do something about and certain things you can't. And they know that their own organization is dysfunctional. And when they look at that, they know that there are things that they wish they could change that they can't. So we need to be honest about this to some extent. Here's what I can do. Here's what I can't do. Here's what the customer's saying. I believe we can do something about this. Some of these other things, maybe not so much. And let's take that off the plate and let's do what we can do.
I've got a million more questions, and I actually have a real life challenge I'm working through that I think you may have just given me a breakthrough. I'm going to get off the couch. This isn't my therapy session. I want to go back to a thing you said regarding slowing down, and really asking pointed questions. Maybe asking, I think it came through in your phrasing that I think the reaction you often get, and it's the same one I've gotten, is that takes too much time to understand. It takes too much time to understand the customer, which is a bananas opinion to have, right? Because what did Abe Lincoln say? I'm going to butcher the phrase, but give me 5 hours to chop down a tree and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening an axe. I don't think the numbers matter. You get the idea. But so you talk a lot about this idea of slowing down in order to speed up as a way of improving the customer experience. So we've already got one example of what that looks like in practice, but do you have any others, any ones that kind of come to mind, maybe some recent experiences you've had?
This is another thing we need to understand about our own brains and how they work. And back to Antonio Damasio's quote, is that most of the time, we are driven by our emotions and our intuition, because it's a lot faster, it requires less energy, and our brains our brains are 2% of our body mass, but it consumes 20% of our body's resources. It is an energy hog. So it looks for ways to economize. And one of the ways it does it is it relies very heavily on emotion and intuition, which operates very, very quickly. Now, the problem with that is that the good enough way of living and making decisions isn't always the best way of making decisions. That we really do need to pull out our critical thinking, our logic, our rational, even though it's more effortful, even though it takes longer, because in novel situations in particular, our logical, rational brain helps us to see nuance, helps us to see dimension, helps us to see abstraction. And if we put it on the back burner and never use it, we're going to make a lot of bad decisions, right? So part of us is our challenge is to understand when we slow things down, we tend to make better decisions when we bring our logic in and we start thinking critically. What's really going on here? What's really happening? Is this really black and white, or is this shades of gray? Is there more than one thing happening here? Maybe there's a couple of things happening, right? When we start to do that, we start to make better decisions. So again, back to Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. There are times when thinking fast is the right answer, and you've seen it 100 times, and your subconscious can do it literally in your sleep, right? You
Right.
just do it subconsciously, and that's the right call. But in complex, new experiences, we got to slow down. And you asked about examples of this. An example is one that's been around for a long time, and both in the quality movement as well as in project management. And I'll tell you about project management because people are probably more familiar with that. One of the biggest factors in project management, you look at the Project Management Institute, which is a training, if you want to be a certified project manager, one of the things they teach you about that is what causes projects to be, delayed, late, over budget. What are those things that really drive that? What are those factors? And one of the biggest factors that drives that is something called scope creep, right?
Mm.
And scope
Yep.
creep means you start a project and then as you're working on it, the requirements start changing on you,
Yep.
right? So you never, the scope gets bigger and bigger. And as the scope gets bigger, it takes more resources, it takes more time, right? So what they preach is slow down, go slow to go fast. Get the requirements really deeply understood. Don't just start working on it. Go get the requirements, slow down, understand what we're really doing, draw a box around that, freeze it, know what's going to be happening, and then start your project. Don't jump at it intuitively. Don't start writing code unless you know what you're writing it for and what problem it solves, right? And they have shown, there's multiple studies that have shown, even if you take a longer period of time up front to get those requirements and to freeze it and you get that really right, it dramatically shortens the overall time of the project because you get rid of all the scope creep, right? So that's a great example of go slow to go fast. Slow down, get it right before you jump at it, before you start to work at it, is, to develop code or to work on the project. People confuse activity and productivity all the time. Just because you're doing something doesn't mean it's making a difference, doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, right? So go slow, figure it out, think, get your logical, rational brain going, and then start executing. Makes a huge difference.
I think the whole of Silicon Valley and the startup community just collectively did a spit take because they all worship at the altar of the Mark Zuckerberg move fast and break things, and you are putting the kibosh on that. It sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, there is something called analysis paralysis, and you can spin for months and not make a
Mm-hmm.
decision and have the one man veto and all of that. That is all true. That can happen, and you want to avoid that. But on the other hand, like you say, if you're just reacting and moving and showing activity, you're burning lots of time and money and effort going in five different directions rather than figuring out what is the one thing that we can do that's really going to matter, that's really going to make a difference. How do we know
Yep.
that? Let's go do that and then let's execute, right? But that's not how our brains are wired. Our brains are wired to go quickly and easily and quickly, fast. Use
Yeah.
our intuition, don't use our logic.
Strike while the iron's hot, right?
Yes.
I was mostly joking because you can obviously see the value in planning your steps out ahead of time. But I think the second point you made is a valuable one too. The analysis paralysis is or yeah, analysis paralysis. I was going to say paralysis by analysis, which is redundant. That's a real thing too. So it is this. It's a delicate dance, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Ed, I want to move on to our next segment, and this is a segment that, full transparency, Ed is very excited about this segment.
Yes.
Ed's got a laundry list of items for this segment, and this is the segment that we refer to as BS in CS. So, Ed, if you had to choose one, what is the trend, catchphrase, or practice related to customer success that you would like to see done away with? And I feel like you're going to give me more than one, but give me your best shot to start.
Well, I love this question, and I think I love it too much. I think I'm up to I was making a list, and I think I'm now up to 49 things that I've seen that you're like, oh my gosh, here we go. Um,
Amen.
yeah, I guess I would say, and we talked about this as well, is that it's we can disagree without being disagreeable, right? To
Mm-hmm.
quote Obama on that, but I think that if I had to boil it down to one thing, I think a bias, again, back to how the brain works, is something we all struggle with and something that the practitioners kind of feed into. What we need to understand is that what applies in one case doesn't automatically apply in all cases. And if there's one thing for people to think about is that when you hear statements where someone says, these are the 10 metrics that you need, or, this is the right way to do it and that's the wrong way to do it, or this is always going to be true, or that's never going to be true. Anytime you hear those kinds of things, listen with a grain of salt, right? Put your critical thinking hat on, even if it's something I say, right? Or that you read or you hear or whatever. Think about things critically, because what applies in one case does not necessarily apply in all. And let me give you an example about that. I was working with a client recently, and they believed, and I believed, that there was a relationship between time to value and customer retention. And we both believe that if we were to shorten that time to value, we would see an increase in customer retention, right? You hear about that, you think about that, that's intuitively obvious. The marketing manager was, yeah, oh yeah, of course that's true. I'm going to start working on this right away because we want to start pushing our customers to adopt faster, right? Because we want these customers to stick around. Well, we actually went and analyzed some data, and it turns out that wasn't true. That in their case, there was no relationship between time to value and customer retention. There was a relationship to whether or not the customer got to value. That was highly predictive of what they were going to do, whether they were going to renew their contract. But in their
Sure.
particular case, they had a subscription element to their product, and they also had a consumption element. And the subscription element was a nominal cost, right? It was not very expensive.
Okay.
Where the value came in and where the company made money was on the consumption portion. So in their particular case, and as we kind of understood what the data was telling us, it's like, oh, this makes sense. They don't, yeah, they sign up for it, but it's not an amount that they would generally care about. And in their case, their customer had to do a lot of work behind the scenes in order to use the platform and to get value from it, right? So what the data was saying was that had that marketing manager rushed ahead, right, and pushed those customers and said, let's go, chop chop, those customers would have said, get out of here, you're bugging me. We're working our own timeline, right? And we're gonna get out of my face here. Basically, that would have blown up on them if had they done that, because we had all assumed that, because that's what you hear, right? Reduce time to value, you retain more customers. In their case, that was not true. So that's what I'm saying, is that when you hear these things and when you hear these pronouncements, and we live in an echo chamber in customer success,
Yeah.
this gets repeated. Anything you hear, whether I say it, anybody else says it, put your critical thinking hat on.
So that's really interesting because yeah, that is it's a trope isn't the right word because it is kind of like it's a law almost, right? An indisputable law. But it's interesting because as soon as you explain it, it does make perfect sense. You would think, and maybe we're too close to the example now. Those folks may listen to this podcast, but you would think that the folks who built the product would be aware of where the value is. Is that fair to say, do you think? Or do you think it can be, I don't know how to ask the question. It doesn't seem that complicated once you spell it out, but maybe that's because you guys went through the data and you discovered it.
Well, it's another example of Wizziati.
Damn, you got me. All right.
Yeah, they were in their own little bubbles. I mean, their reality was this is what's going on. They weren't seeing it from their customers' reality. And these were principals in the business that were thinking this, right?
Sure.
They thought they knew. They thought they knew.
So I'm going to distill this one down to trust but verify. Right?
Mhm.
Fair? Huh?
Yes.
All right. Pass the test. All right. Do you have another one that you wanna bring up?
Ah, boy, so many. Let me look at my list. I mean, I honestly, I think that's a big one, and I think that encapsulates a lot of them. Thinking that there are simple answers to complex problems. That was another one, but it's kind of the same thing. Is that we tend to oversimplify. That's our emotional intuitive brain looking for what's the simple rule, what's the heuristic I can apply here. our logical, rational self sees complexity, sees dimensions, sees gray areas, right? And if we think that there are simple answers, and when people give us a simple answer, that's very attractive. We like that. But when we put our critical thinking hats on, when people are using all or nothing, it's very black and white. That should be a trigger for us to say, yeah, I think there's more to it than that.
Yeah, I think those are two birds of a feather. The first example you gave of trust but verify, but one of the first examples you gave was this idea of the 10 things to do, in customer success. This is, if you do these 10 things, you'll retain every customer you ever had. And I immediately, my brain wanders, and I immediately thought of, this is Mark Cuban's morning routine, and if you do these 7 things, you'll be a billionaire and own an NBA team. And
it's just that simple.
It is just that simple, right? And I remember coming to this conclusion some time ago. How about the Miracle Morning? Have you read the Miracle Morning?
Have not.
So it's this idea of, I'm certainly paraphrasing, I'm certainly minimizing it because I did not read the whole thing, but it was basically, wake up at 4 a.m. every day, go for a run, because that's when you can, because none of your responsibilities have woken up yet alongside you, and everything will be better. And coming from a person who I think I need more sleep than the normal person, I was like, oh, so I'm never going to be successful because I can't get up first thing in the morning and go for a jog. And when I realized, well, that's an idiotic assumption to make, I started doing the same thing you said, right? And I think everybody has this power. I'm not special in any way, of just kind of questioning where the incentive is for those lists, where that information is coming from, where it's going, who's it for. I also have this saying I say a lot: do good work, and everything else comes out in the wash. Another way said might be, do the hard work, because that's really what it ends up being. There is no shortcut, and you can apply that to probably most of the things on your list. There's no shortcut for any of this, and you've got to do the hard work. You've got to slow down to speed up. You've got to ask the hard questions, and you've got to ask them of every customer, because it's like you said, every customer is different. Even if they're buying the exact same product, could be in the same vertical, could be selling to the exact same customers they are. But if you don't do the hard work, if you take shortcuts, if you make assumptions, the only person that's going to make an ass out of is you and your company.
That's right. That's well said. Yeah. And I'm reminded by when you were talking about that. I'm a big fan of and lived through the quality movement. And one of the great gurus is W. Edwards Deming. And Deming talked about hope for instant pudding, right? That is a major disease that people have, meaning we want the quick, easy fix. Give me the answer, give me the one rule I can use. That's intuitively, emotionally very appealing.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we gravitate towards it, but we fall into a trap, right? And it's exactly what you said, is that you got to do the hard work. You've got to ask the tough questions. You got to slow down to go fast. You've got to really get at how does this customer define this value and why? And how does this one decision maker within my account define it? And why do they define it differently than this other person over here? Because they're both involved in that decision. Oh, and by the way, these are unique people. When I go to the next account, it's a different answer, right? And when you know that, and when you know that deeply, and you don't just assume, then you can really help them. Then you can really be effective.
Ed, this has been fantastic. You scrambled my brain a little bit, which I appreciate. I think it's good. It maintains perspective. But I do want to wrap things up. I want to make sure that you can move on to the rest of your day, which I understand is going to be leisurely. But in this conclusion, I always like to ask guests of the podcast to provide a referral or a recommendation to the audience that you think would benefit them. So is there anything that you'd like to share with them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always open for a conversation. Love to talk to people. Love to learn from people. If folks want to connect to me, LinkedIn's easy. By all means, just reach out to me there, or go to my website, www.se for serviceexcellence-partners.com, and happy to chat anytime.
Great. And I'll put that in the show notes so everybody gets they can click on that and find you there. Ed, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I hope to speak to you again soon.
Thoroughly enjoyed it, Dylan. Love your podcast, and keep up the good work.
Thanks, Ed.
You've been listening to Lifetime Value, the podcast for customer success professionals. If you like what you've heard, please rate our show and subscribe wherever you find your podcast. Please note that the views expressed in these conversations are attributed only to those individuals on this podcast and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of their respective employers. For all inquiries, please reach out via email to dylan@lifetimevaluepodcast.com. Find us on YouTube via our channel, Lifetime Value, and find us on the socials at Lifetime Value Podcast. Until next time.
We have done enough nerd talk, right? Oh, I'm sorry. That I don't mean it that way, Ed. But
I'm a proud nerd.
I feel like everybody is now, right? Like when I was on the playgrounds as a child, people calling me nerd, they were not coming up to congratulate me. I was usually running from them. So it seems like the tables have turned. I still have a little bit of PTSD about it, but yes, absolutely. Everybody's a proud nerd these days.
You got it.
Well, hey, look, maybe. I don't know. Jury's still out.